Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We do appreciate it. Want to apologize for not getting a weekly update out this week. I've got my contributor on the line here, Rory. And Rory, you know we couldn't do it without your help. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your kind words.
Also on the line is our longtime friend, Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada. Jeff, how are you today?
Always fun to be here.
Always nice to have you, Jeff. I am seriously angry, guys, and I want to share a sound bite that I'm sure everybody's heard by now, but it warrants discussion. I am so angry at the people in control of our government. Listen to this.
Vice President Joe Biden calls the newest graduates of the Air Force Academy strategic thinkers as well as warriors, and the future of the New World Order.
It allows us to refocus our intelligence and military assets and resources to other parts of the world where they are needed.
Okay, I'm going to pause it and then I'm going to play it again here. He says it allows us to send our assets and our resources wherever in the world they are needed. Does that remind you guys of the Navy motto, a global force for good? When did this country become the global police force, for good or bad? And in most cases, I think you both agree it's for bad. It's for the banksters. But let me continue here.
Where we face new challenges. This is the world you are graduating into.
They're graduating into a new world order, as he's about to tell them.
This is what I want to talk about today with you for a few minutes.
Now, these are graduating military cadets, and this is Joe Biden, the chief mafioso of the New World Order, next to Obama in our own government. Here's what he tells these graduating cadets.
I believe we, and particularly you, your class, has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century in a way consistent with American interest and the common interest.
Now, the reason I wanted to play that for our esteemed friend Jeff Nielson and those listening is because what he is saying is, when he says American interests, Jeff, he means bankster interests. When he says American interests, he means the interests of the New World Order, which George Bush Sr. talked about, some 221 or 227 times while he was president. This plan has been long in the making, and they are not going to give up without a fight. Do you guys find this clip as disgusting as I do? Because I find it horrifying.
Well, I find it kind of scary, if nothing else. I mean, if I was listening to this with a German accent speaking, I would swear I was listening to a Third Reich, diatribe. Because, whenever you have a society refer to its military members as its great thinkers, that's the time to be really, really scared. At one time, a couple thousand years ago, when our societies were much simpler, the members of the Army tended to be the most educated members of society, and so it produced a certain amount of their best thinkers. But, those days are long gone. You look at the drones in the armed forces for any of our nations, and, great thinkers is definitely not a label that comes to mind.
Well, it's just an endless litany of horrifying news for anybody who's liberty-minded, and we know that DOD documents are now being released showing that Obama and the Department of Defense and the people at the Pentagon have considered using the military against the American people and against uprisings. Okay? They're not only thinking about it, they're acting now. They're putting pen to paper, and they've written documents that in their minds justify the use of military against the citizens of the United States. Now, there is nothing more fascist than that, and this new world order of which Biden speaks is that. The American people are now the enemy. And Jeff, we see that when it comes to our money too. They print, and then the banks destroy the precious metals prices through paper manipulation, as we saw this past week, despite the fact that we know that Barclays and other big banks, but of course the mainstream media just focuses on one Barclays trader, we know for a fact that they are criminally manipulating the prices of precious metals through paper fraud. But that's the New World Order, so if you don't like it, time to leave the country. But guess what? You're going to need a spaceship. You're going to need to leave planet Earth, because this New World Order is hell-bent on controlling the whole planet.
Well, when you continue to connect the banksters with this political fascism, the thing I'd like to point out is the fallacy of this whole phrase "New World Order" because, in fact, what's going on here is the old world order. You know, there's nothing older than the fat cats at the top trying to steal everything and totally oppress all the people. I mean, that's the oldest game in the book, literally, and the people that are doing it are the oldest tyrants in our societies. So, you know, of course, the biggest misnomer of all in all of the labeling that comes out of the media is New World Order, because this is the oldest game, this crime syndicate.
Yeah, that's very well said. I mean, it literally is Egyptian slave drivers. I mean, it's serfdom. That is what the New World Order is. That's what they want to do. They want to reduce carbon emissions to zero, according to Bill Gates. They want to enslave us all. And if they don't give us other technologies that allow us affordable access to energy, then they will return us to serfdom as they reduce carbon emissions to zero. And we have to rewind our living standards to 16th century living standards as the elite live in their fortified bunkers surrounded by New World Order military, protecting them as they enslave the rest of us. And I know that sounds like I'm overstating it. I know that sounds zany to new listeners. But it's time new listeners pay attention. It's time new listeners get focused in on the real news, like the documents being leaked from the DOD saying that Obama can use the military against citizen uprisings in the United States. Never before in our history have we seen that. Never before in the history have we seen that in the United States, but we've seen it in other countries, haven't we, Jeff? We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in Russia. We've seen it in Italy. Where else have we seen it? We've seen it all over the planet, but it's new to us in this country.
Well, it's the fascist blueprint that they put in place in all of the various victim states that they stick their nose into. And of course, now things have deteriorated so much within our own societies that it's become our own blueprint as well.
Well, let me read this headline to you guys because it all ties into the same all-seeing eye pyramid of power, whether we're talking about the IMF or the World Bank or the Bank of International Settlements. Here's a headline from Mike Adams at Natural News. World Bank warns of food riots as rising food prices push world populations toward revolt. Jeff, in your estimation, is this exactly what the powers that be want to see? They want to see desperation and they want to see revolt so that they can then crush the revolt? Or are they losing control, as some people would argue?
Well, you know, there's sort of two dimensions to this. The whole point of fascism is that it's basically an economic philosophy. Those on top plundering anything and everything in sight. So it's an inherently cannibalistic and unsustainable system. So, you know, the whole point of every fascist system is those on top know that they're going to reach a point of utter destruction. And so this is, of course, is why all the political and military machinery is already in place to bring out the thugs with their billy clubs. The secret prisons are already built. You know, the Constitution's already been ripped to shreds. So, you know, the stage is set for the next phase that the fascists know that they're creating, the total devolution of their own economies and societies to the point where the citizens must rise up because sooner or later they're simply going to be hungry.
Yeah, and I don't know how hungry people rise up, especially when you have children. I've long said, even when I had conversations back in the day with Bob Chapman, that this was the plan, that, you know, if you keep people hungry, then you can control them. That is, I think, what they're doing with the food stamps program. If you have 49 million people on food stamps, then it's pretty easy to control those people, both politically and otherwise. Now, as it speaks to this banking cabal that's in control of our government, Jeff, I want to read this to you. I transcribed this from our friends over at Finance and Liberty who did an interview with Jim Willey, and it goes like this. Quote, Ron Paul saw to it that the audit took place. He's talking about the audit of the Fed. And they found two different loans totaling $23 trillion. And it was to the directors and owners and the board of directors for the Federal Reserve itself. And it's not exactly a joke, Willie says. It's a tragic commentary. They gave $23 trillion to the various families so they could buy up the world's assets when they crashed the system. And here's the sickening part.
The sickening part is that there's a rules of engagement concept for satanic systems. I do not use that word loosely. Satanic systems. It's warn your victim and invite him to volunteer for the sacrifice.
Now, Willie goes on in that interview to say, and the American people don't care.
So, when they did the audit as part of the FINREG bill, and they discovered The public discovered the 23 trillion in near 0% loans. The public has been warned of what's going on, and the public doesn't comprehend a damn thing.
This is all public record, the $23 trillion that has gone to the banks, and probably a lot more than that to European banks, to banks all over the planet, to corporations, and to Federal Reserve insiders. It's public record, and the American people do not care. And that's why we're in so much trouble.
Well, let me just stop things right here for a moment, because, the problem when things like this come out in the media with, commentators like Jim Willey or Paul Craig Roberts, is that these commentators tend to stop before asking the most important question of all. Where are these mountains of money coming from? The whole point is, where did the 23 trillion come from? There's never been 23 trillion in money printing ever reported in the total history of the U.S. economy, let alone having a lump that size just go around handing out like sugar plums. So the point here is simply the number itself proves something that I've been alleging in my commentaries now for nearly 2.5 years, that the Federal Reserve is literally counterfeiting U.S. dollars. It's printing up trillions of dollars that it's not reporting, and then it's only these counterfeit trillions behind the scenes propping up all these bubbles that have prevented the whole house of cards from already collapsing. And of course, another little tip of the iceberg indication of this was the article that Paul Craig Roberts put out about the Treasury's laundering with Belgium's government, where all of a sudden $140 billion of treasuries shows up on the books of the Belgian government, which equals 30% of its GDP. And, this is over a period of like 4 months. So, with a government that doesn't have a single, I don't know what their currency is, dollars worth of currency to buy any treasuries at all, they suddenly have 140 billion pop onto their books. This would be like the China suddenly buying $4 trillion of U.S. treasuries. It's just totally preposterous. So, that was another example of money laundering. And of course, what Paul Craig Roberts didn't ask in his commentary was, where did that 123 billion come from to make the phony purchase for Belgium's government to deposit it on their books and thus launder it. So you see what's happening here with examples like this treasuries laundering. It's not simply the worthless treasuries that are being laundered in these transactions, but the currency to purchase the treasuries is simultaneously being laundered. So this is the whole thing. It's, there's nothing better than being a counterfeiter who's in charge of the monetary system. You can simply feed in all these funds to the same conduit you were feeding them into officially, except do it unofficially, and then of course you don't have to report the massive increase in the money printing. I mean, I'm sure most of your readers who've seen my work have already seen the chart of the U.S. adjusted monetary base. And it's a vertical line, where basically in a matter of a couple of years, the entire monetary base tripled. And I mean, that's officially. So when you have somebody, generally talking about 23 trillion that's floating around here, if that was actually reported, that vertical line would be even straighter and about 6 times as high. So, I mean, this is the whole point here, is what they're reporting by itself is a hyperinflationary level of money printing. What they're actually doing behind the scenes is probably an order of magnitude above that.
When you talk about counterfeiting, Jeff, do you guys remember what the penalty was back in the early days of our nation for counterfeiting? Do you know how they dissuaded people from counterfeiting the currency?
No.
Well, according to the Constitution, it's death.
That's right. And
that's what it says.
That's right. And it used to say that on some of the money in this country. It also used to say payable in gold on demand or payable in silver on demand. But truly, it said counterfeiting equals death. So we know what the penalty is for what they're doing. But because there is no rule of law and there is no justice for those who run this criminal system, the people have no recourse at this point. And now they've stolen the military. They've stolen the military-industrial complex. They've stolen the Pentagon. They've stolen the DOD, which used to be called the Department of War back in the day, guys. But, of course, Bernays convinced them that they should change it to the Department of Defense because we live in this Orwellian, topsy-turvy world where truth are lies and right is wrong. And what else did Orwell say?
War is peace.
War is peace. That's right. So we have
freedom is slavery.
Thank you, Rory. So we've got the Department of Defense, which used to be called the Department of War, but is clearly being operated in its modern-day capacity as the Department of War. But let's get back to this idea of counterfeiting and the one bank, Jeff, which I give you so much credit for because you are right. Most of the people in our sphere of influence will stop before talking too much about the Rothschilds and the one bank. So we can talk about that, but before we do, and maybe you'll segue into that, let's talk about this Belgium buyer. Now, we've talked to Andy Hoffman, and he thinks it's probably the Fed, and we've talked to Peter Schiff, who thinks it may be the ECB, the European Central Bank. And my point has been that it doesn't matter because the Fed was giving money to the ECB anyway under the 2008 bailouts and the trillions. So it's one and the same, but what is your take? Who is this mysterious Belgium buyer?
Well, no, you exactly hit the nail on the head. It doesn't matter at all. We know that the counterfeiting is going on. So whether it's, and of course we know that now, the EU bloc and the North American bloc are total partners in crime. So whether every bit of counterfeiting are new Federal Reserve notes or whether some of it are now ECB euros, it's totally irrelevant. The currency being used in these money laundering enterprises is totally illegitimate. It's not being reported, and of course, so everything about these transactions is criminal, and the reason they've now degenerated to this level of criminality is because they can't even report the level of their money printing, because then even the dim-witted drones in the mainstream media would start saying the word hyperinflation. When you talk about what's been going on and the large strategies and the New World Order, and I talk about the Old World Order, let me just pluck something out here from one of the first things I ever published on our site. It's entitled The Banker's Manifesto of 1892. And, I passed it along to you over the years, so you might remember that name. But let me just take a tiny quote out of this manifesto, which was originally presented by Charles Lindbergh Sr., one of the real vigilant members of the U.S. government in that era. And here's the quote. When through the process of the law, the common people have lost their homes, they will be more tractable and easily governed through the influence of the strong arm of the government applied to a central power of imperial wealth under the control of the leading financiers. People without homes will not quarrel with their leaders.
Right. Well, it's the perfect segue into a piece that I wrote and released on May 26th. And again, I'm going to reference Jim Willey because he truly does have that voice that cuts through so much noise. And here was the title of the piece as I wrote it. And of course, I was inspired by GoldSeek's first live webinar, which was held with Willey on May 5th. I want to read this to you guys. Willey told GoldSeek, quote, "The evil, corrupt forces control the governments, they control the regulators, they control the central banks, they control apparently more of the military and news networks than we want to admit." And I just want to add to that right now, we have Bilderberg meetings going on. And Willey's right, the news networks are totally controlled because we don't see them talking about the Bilderberg meeting where policy is being set, New World Order policy is being discussed and set, and the mainstream media won't touch it. Willey goes on to say, they basically control the power centers. So they don't have to abide by the rule of law. So they will continue to enrich themselves and play their games. And the more they exert their control in this manner with false gold pricing, even though they have largely absent inventory supply, the more the Eastern Hemisphere is going to bring about an alternative which they have been working on for over 3 years. I think that's a decent segue into this idea of the Eastern Hemisphere and all the gold moving into China's hands and India's hands and Russia's hands, for that matter, Jeff. I want your take on that, but I think this speaks exactly to what you were just saying, which is the power centers are controlled by the people sitting at the top of the pyramid, and that includes the media in this country. And that's why so many sheeple are unable to wake up. That's why the people don't care about the 23 trillion that went to these banks, to these banksters, because most of the sheeple don't know.
Well, and the irony here is that, when the Rothschilds and, those that have come before them in these cycles of oppression perpetrate their game, these empires, they almost always disintegrate from within. The great empires of history, if we want to call this a great empire, they don't get destroyed from external enemies. They go rotten from their own power and then disintegrate from within. And so, I mean, this is the futile aspect of human history, and one of the reasons why it's so important for people to be students of history and to get this perspective of the inevitability of things here, because the more complete their control, the longer it allows them to perpetrate these crimes. But the further they perpetrate these crimes, the greater the crash they're going to create, and the less chance they have of controlling the aftermath. So, it's the precise level of control which continues to increase the probability of their own complete self-annihilation in the not too distant future.
Well, I think that's what we're all hoping for. We're all hoping that they annihilate themselves and this thing falls apart. But
take us with them, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm afraid of. And they're going to take the whole world with them. That's what these people are doing. They're throwing an absolute nightmarish World War III temper tantrum over their monetary magic money machines that they do not want to give up.
The dress rehearsal that made it crystal clear what would happen when push came to shove was the crash of '08. Mm-hmm. Because what we need to do is back up before that and realize that as that time was approaching, it was the U.S. economy and only the U.S. economy that was about to crash. Europe was limping along. Most of the rest of the world was booming, but the U.S. didn't want to go down alone. So the bankers perpetrated their financial massive crime where they suddenly simultaneously stopped all credit in this credit-based global economy and created a global crash to hide the fact the U.S. was going down alone. And so, of course, when the big global crash comes, it's going to be even a larger scale attempt to hide their own crash by taking everybody else and everything else down with them.
Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room now, which is in the wide open. Like, literally anybody with a pulse, anybody with a brain cell and two neurons to rub together and two synapses that are firing is got to understand now that the banksters manipulate the prices of the precious metals. It's not tinfoil hat stuff anymore. It's quantifiably proven stuff. GATTA's been talking about it for over a decade. So have you. So has Jim Willey. So has Andy Hoffman. So has Peter Schiff. So has anybody. Jim Sinclair. Us. Anybody with two brain cells knows what's going on. And despite the fact that on August 14th, supposedly the silver fix in London is being shut down, what did we see over the last week, Jeff? We saw the annihilation of the prices of physical silver. By how? By what mechanism? By paper metals being sold into the market hand over fist, because there is no rule of law. So the elephant in the room, Jeff, is the fact that we all know what's going on. Putin knows what's going on. China understands what's going on. And still the precious metals prices fall day in, day out, week in, week out, and there is no recourse. So the only recourse is to keep buying, right? Which is what China's doing, which is what Russia's doing, which is what I'm doing. And my question is when does that part of this Ponzi end?
Well, that's why, of course, they're so obsessed with keeping as much of the global gold industry as possible in paper form, because obviously there's only a minute fraction of the gold in existence now that's necessary to satisfy all of their existing obligations to all the various buyers. All the ounces have been sold maybe 5 times over, maybe 10 times over. So I mean that's job one, is to try to keep the paper gold market as large as possible. But beyond that, then of course, as you say, it's all a matter of the rate at which the physical metal is consumed. And so, it's not a matter of even saying, as was said a few years ago by Max Kaiser, take down JP Morgan by buying silver. We don't even need to think about it in terms of offensive action. And we don't want to, characterize it like that, because of course then the propaganda machine will just demonize us as, who knows, terrorists. So, we simply want to be in the mindset that we're simply protecting ourselves by getting rid of this soon-to-be worthless paper and putting our wealth into metal. And the consequences of protecting ourselves is that we steadily weaken the bankers' paper empire by doing so.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. Every dollar that is taken out of the system and transferred into metal is one less dollar of debt that they get to use.
No, that's a great point, and that's why I've always said, guys, as you know, that I think the most libertarian-minded, the most patriotic thing a person can do is divest some of their fiat cash from this criminal system, get it out of the hands of the bankers and into your own pocket in the form of precious metals, which they cannot use derivatives and fractional reserve banking and everything else to multiply your fiat dollars into more fiat dollars. Take it out of the system, and you can help kill and starve the beast. I want to talk now about the U.S. economy, which, Jeff, you've coined as the Greater Depression. As the U.S. Greater Depression progresses, I want to congratulate you on Zero Hedge picking up one of your most recent articles. U.S. gasoline consumption plummets by nearly 75%. I want to add to that, folks, that's since its peak in 1998. Jeff, we posted your piece several days ago, probably a week ago, and Zero Hedge posted it more recently here, I think, on Friday, and it has 46,000 reads at Zero Hedge, a very, very popular site, as people know. Why don't we talk a little bit about that article and talk about the reality of the U.S. economy as we see retail giants struggling and former retail giants shuttering their doors in this economy, which is now, 75% retail, service-based? This country is hosed.
And this is the whole point. It's a consumption economy, and it's a automobile economy. And so, this is why a statistic like gasoline consumption is so revealing. Because obviously, for there to be a U.S. recovery, there would have to be, at the very least, stability in gasoline consumption, if not increased gasoline consumption, so that people can go to work, so that they can go to the stores and shop. It's just that simple. And so, but of course, the size of the collapse of this statistic is also revealing, because it's something that simply can't have happened naturally as it's being reported. An economy cannot disintegrate by 75%, which is what this statistic implies, as we've seen reported since 1998. But of course, it's important to understand the way the U.S. government reports gasoline consumption. It doesn't report it by actually reporting the consumption itself. What it reports instead is the amount of gasoline that's being supplied into the inventories of the big oil companies that operate the gas stations. So it's a wholesale end look at so-called consumption. And of course, by creating that statistic in this manner, it allowed them to hide the collapse in real consumption, because they just continue to flood the storage tanks with all this excess gasoline over this last 4 or 5 years of this so-called recovery. Gasoline that was never really needed because it wasn't being bought. So now what's happening is all of the storage facilities for these domestic retailers are full. And so this is why we've seen a sudden collapse. And of course, when I reported the 75% collapse since 1998, 65% of that collapse has been since the start of the so-called recovery. In 5 years, supposedly U.S. gasoline consumption has plummeted by 65%. Simply not possible. They were oversupplying the market dramatically when they wanted to pretend the recovery was starting, when they wanted to pretend that there was going to be increased consumption as everybody went to the mall to shop. And of course, it never happened. There's never been the shopping, there's never been the driving. The storage tanks are full, and now they can't hide the lies any longer. So now we see this massive collapse being reported. And of course, the way the government tries to hide this massive collapse is to simply not mention it at all and hope that nobody notices.
Well, and I don't know that many people are noticing. Those of us who are awake are noticing, but according to Zero Hedge, what all Goldman Sachs clients believe will happen in the near future is almost all clients have the same outlook: 3% economic growth, rising earnings, rising bond yields, and a rising equity market between now and 2016. These people are insane. I mean, the people that believe that and believe the government propaganda that there has been a recovery and that the recovery will continue are literally either on crack, Jeff, or they are idiots, because there is no other explanation. Because again, anybody paying attention, anybody reading Zero Hedge on a daily basis, anybody reading your material or Andy Hoffman's material or Peter Schiff's material or Jim Sinclair's material or James Turk's material or anything at Silver Doctors or anything at Brother John F. or anything anywhere other than MSNBC, CNBC, and NBC and the mainstream mockingbirds knows that it's all a lie. It's all a fallacy. It's a fable. The New World Order powers have painted a picture that there's been a recovery, and the only recovery going on is in their own brokerage accounts as they pilfered trillions.